Hi there, everybody, and welcome to slightly delayed Mahamudra for the People. I want to thank you for your patience. I'm not super adept with all these platforms. I'm constantly shifting, so forgive the rocky start. Um, but yeah, happy Friday, and thank you for being here. I see a question. I just want to see. Um, so, I'm going to take one little moment to settle. And if we can, as we have up until this session, take a little moment to call to mind the reason why we practice. Right? And so, this is why it is that we come to Dharma practice. Understanding our propensity towards suffering, taking time to honestly assess the relative tumultuousness of our mind and the way that we experience phenomenon. Understanding the ways that other people suffer when they're engulfed in rage, difficult emotion, stuck in depression. And then take a moment to contemplate this precious human birth we have. Here we are, human, but not here for long. Like this, one of the things that makes this human existence so precious is how temporary it is. It's very fragile. It's important to be able to take care of ourselves, take care of others. Come back to this very basic realization. And then privately taking refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha in a way that's almost it's most meaningful to you. Taking refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha. And taking refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha. And taking refuge in the Lama and the Yidam and the Protector, the three roots, the Lama, the Yidam and the Protector. Taking refuge in the Lama and the Yidam and the Protector. It's nice to see everybody, and yeah, a little choppy, but we got here. Before we go any further, I want to kind of give some folks an update. So I am. I'm just pulling this up so that I'm totally clear. Yeah, so I am going to be in retreat for part of April, and then all of May and all of June, which means I'm not going to be able to be present um, all of those days. so I won't be able to be here. Actually, the last Mahamudra for the People class that I'll be able to offer until July, um, the week after July 4th, will be the 2nd of um, April. So we have today, we have the 26th, and we have the 2nd. So 3 more sessions. So I think, though, we may be able to completely finish this text, transmission of Pointing Out the Dharmakaya, by the ninth Karmapa. And hopefully that's the case. If, in that case, everybody will have a lot to practice in the interim. But I just want to kind of let you all know that as personally as I can in this format. And the schedules will be updated to reflect that. So I'm not sure if there'll be anything in my absence, but I just want to offer this to you myself, and I'll bring it up in the next 2 sessions so that everyone's aware. Yeah. So let's take a little moment to practice. And given the fact that I do, the time is limited in many ways, let's just sit for about 9 minutes so that we can keep going with this text. So allow yourself to rest into at the very least, the practice of shamatha. Or vipassana if that feels good. But allow yourself to rest into the present moment using whatever anchor feels most powerful, profound to you. Allow yourself to settle and rest with whatever is present. So slowly bring yourself back to this gathering and take a moment to consider what that experience was like. So there are two questions that I'd like to address. First, and I just want to encourage folks to ask questions. You can do that by entering the question into the text box on the side of the page, or the Ask a Question tab on the bottom. And so I'll start off with the first one that came in from George. He writes, my query is about the primordial mind. Please. Specifically, certain images that we perceive are inherently empty. A rainbow, for example. And also reflected images, albeit in a mirror, in a pool, or water, in a pane of glass. These phenomena are simple examples of emptiness. Do they correlate in any way to the mind empty of arising thoughts we seek? Or are these separate concepts of emptiness? So, these examples, they often use like the reflection of the moon in water, a pond, pool, or even a glass of tea, for example. We can look and see that reflection, right? And so we'll see the moon, but it's clearly not the moon, right? And that's the way that it is an example of emptiness. It's clear, it's apparent, right? But it's not actually the moon. In that way, there is not. So those are examples of what emptiness, the emptiness of mind, the emptiness of experience is like. So in this way, they correlate to the experience of mind, the experience of thought or emotional reactivity, etc., in the following way. When thought activity arises, right? So, just sit and look directly in front of you and, just use appearance as your field of reference. And all of the thought activity that may arise, if thought activity is arising, tends to be in relationship to what is quote unquote being experienced. The thought activity tends to be an expression of energy, an expression of reaction, a demonstration of the fact that, these things exist. Again, like I've got a bookshelf in front of me, so there are these books, and, some I quite enjoy reading. And so, it's possible for me to kind of just sit in meditation and then find myself, oh yeah, I wouldn't mind, curling up in bed with one of these books. Right? The thought activity is happening, right? And in a sense, that's mind, right? But when we begin to experience more deeply, there actually is a different kind of experience underneath the thought activity, as being kind of like the ground, this, primordial mind, right? And so the thought activity tends to be in reaction to the various things that we're experiencing through our sense faculties. It's not necessarily the case that, mind and thought is different, but thought activity tends to be taken quite literally. We'll end up becoming quite agitated sometimes, right? The thought activity becomes overwhelming, and then it actually feels as if, we get this kind of claustrophobic experience, right? The thought activity becomes real, right? But the thoughts come and go, right? They're not really as real as they are when we experience them in that sense of heightened reactivity. Same with emotions. Somebody could, I don't know. I mean, I'm not feeling, I guess, particularly emotionally reactive right now, but something could happen. Someone could walk in here and smack me in the face, and shout things at me, and then, I would have an emotional reaction. And there's nothing wrong with the reactivity, but the more that we cycle into that kind of habit and the subsequent secondary and tertiary reactions, all of a sudden we're experiencing something real that feels real, that is just a mind and experience of agitation. Right? So these are all, the example of the reflection of the moon and water, is kind of like a skillful means, as a way of demonstrating what the emptiness of mind is like, right? But it's not to be taken too literally as a symbol, if that makes sense. But hopefully that's helpful. Then the next question is, can you speak about when the aspiration to benefit, to be benefit to all, can feel slightly oppressive and maybe distinguish self-care from self-cherishing? This is a good question, and it's complicated. It's complicated for a couple of reasons. One, I'll take the second part first. Self-care, what's the difference between self-care and self-cherishing? I mean, that is actually not so complicated, because self-care is about understanding our limitations, right? And understanding when we've, quote unquote, gone too far, right? When we've exerted too much energy, when we've experienced too much. Let's say we're traumatized, right? Self-care is, the practice of learning how to walk back, right? Learning how, at other times, how to hold boundaries to ensure that we are not burning ourselves out. Now, I know that there can easily be a kind of self-hating way of practicing Dharma, and I'm not saying, Brett, that this is what you're doing, but people who really don't like themselves, people who don't let themselves rest into the experience of being empowered to practice, people who have a hard time recognizing that their basic core is rooted in Buddha nature, right? That there is not necessarily a huge, that maybe the mountain we need to climb looks a lot more steep than it actually is, right? So for when we find ourselves caught in these places, we can accidentally practice in a way where we're quite harmful to ourselves, where the texts can have bravado. I mean, there's definitely a like a tough guy kind of practice thing, which is, I think it really, to be honest, is more of a literary device than something real. So people will say in public teachings, oh, you have to check your mind all the time. Oh, you need to do this. Oh, you need to make sure that your intention is pure. Oh, you need to do all of that, right? But it's not because we're failures and we need to kind of, push up, pull ourselves up. No matter how long it's been that we've kind of misapprehended phenomena, there's absolutely no reason to be harsh with ourselves. unless we're kind of congenitally unable to bring ourselves to practice. It's like, well, that's cool. I'm gonna just like do nothing, and we can hold ourselves accountable, you know, for that. Um, in private, the way people often teach is that we need to take care of ourselves. I was once told by Gyaltsen Rinpoche. Gyaltsen Rinpoche said, told me at one point, and he had been taught this by previous Kala Rinpoche. He's like, one of the most important pieces of advice I can give is let your practice be beautiful, right? So here I am, like, right, I fly, halfway across the world to go to India, and, I have this kind of, routine where I get to Sikkim very quickly, but it means pushing myself, quite a bit. I get there, and, the instruction is to practice, make your practice beautiful. But it's not, what that means is for your practice to be art. The way you hold your body, the way you move through space, the way you place your shoes, the way you address others. And we can very easily get into this kind of nihilistic position of being like, oh, well, nothing matters, it's all emptiness, and, I'm just, I'm a pile of shit if I can't remember that, if I can't recognize that. Right? But Dharma practice is, just as much about inhabiting space in direct relationship to everything that arises, and then inhabiting space in direct relationship to everybody around us, right? And this means effectively owning our activity. It means demonstrating wisdom, because that's part of our practice. It means demonstrating care. It means recognizing that this body is a locus of power. It's the seat of not just one deity, it's the seat of thousands of deities. It contains the energy needed to kind of, push us over the edge to experience liberation. Right? And so there's no point in disrespecting it. There's no point in torturing it. This is something that the Buddha ended up, learning, after he nearly drowned and was fed milk rice by Sujata. We see things in relationship to the product, which is enlightenment. And just as we do with most other things, in our capitalist culture, we rush, we can be like robber barons. Then the most important thing is I just need to get that enlightenment, man. If I don't get enlightenment, like, or I'm going to screw everyone over, including myself, in order to get that enlightenment. I don't care about the form. I'm just got to get that. And that is, ironically, that just stretches the process out longer, Our work is inhabiting awakening. And so that means learning how to care for ourselves. And to care for ourselves is not to cherish ourselves necessarily, but at the same time, what is wrong with cherishing oneself? What is wrong with taking care? What is wrong with slowing down? And what is wrong with not rushing? What is wrong with allowing yourself to be supple gentle? What is wrong with putting down, especially like a very patriarchal product and action-oriented way of practicing? You know, and then the aspiration to benefit all other beings. Well, I mean, I suppose that could feel oppressive. I'm curious how it does feel oppressive, though, because, you know, other beings are on fire. Other beings are shooting people. Other beings are shooting themselves. Other beings, I mean, think about all of the ways that we have suffered. Yeah, even just today. Yeah, I woke up, and within 5 minutes of waking up, I learned of somebody's death. And I know that's not necessarily everybody's experience, and that's kind of a little unique, perhaps, to my work, right? But then the work becomes addressing this painful death, right? This other person, the person who died, woke up and died. Their family, large family, is in terrible pain, the pain of loss, this, intense suffering. I mean, consider everybody who's sick right now. So it can feel oppressive, perhaps, in the sense that, yes, like this whole planet is on fire, literally. And that could feel oppressive, but that's also kind of the nature of where we're at right now. Why is this important? It's important because, in almost like a Pavlovian way, we are practicing Dharma because we suffer, because we understand, how we get tripped up, how we fall prey to our projections, how we are constantly projecting, how at times, while we think we might not be hurting other people, we accidentally are. It might not be the intention. If we're too comfortable, the desire to practice kind of fades a little bit. I'll do it tomorrow, man. I got all this awesome stuff to do. So is it the case, Brett, that it's oppressive because it seems like so much suffering, or is it oppressive for some other reason? Caretaker position. Oh, yes. Well, yeah. I mean, it's hard, right? We need to kind of, we go through our experiences with respect to caring for other people, how we've been cared for. And there's no one right way. And absolutely, things can be hard or painful or confusing based on our personal story. And yet, we all bring our baggage. Absolutely. No, I get that. No, I really like your questions. I appreciate them. They're good. Um, it's not that we put on kind of Wonder Woman clothes and fly into the air in a invisible jet with a lasso of truth to save people in that way. It's not like we're kind of putting ourselves in the center and we're doing the fighting the good fight and all of that. Um, if we can really just bring it down to all of the ways that we have suffered since we woke up, and then understand that the person living downstairs, or the person living in the next building, or the person sitting on a plane right now, or the person riding a boat somewhere, or the person in a taxi or a subway, a person walking somewhere, has had a pretty similar experience, sometimes much worse than ours, then this kind of natural desire for the ending of that suffering can arise. But yeah, if we're the kind of person who's like, check me out, man, like I'm really saving the world and I'm so great, and like lean back like this and just be like, like check me out, I'm the bee's knees because I'm saving the world. Yeah, that's a problem, right? Um, you know, and Masumi's question or statement, been on fire lately to practice, which also feels unbalanced. I hear that, and I understand. There's been a lot of really intense stuff, right? Like there's the shootings in Atlanta. Um, there's just so much, and admittedly, like I think or I can speak from my own experience, kind of go through these cycles. Sometimes I'm more outwardly oriented, and then sometimes I'm kind of more internally oriented. And the past few months, I've been just very inwardly oriented and not really paying attention too much to a lot of stuff in the news cycles. So I've actually missed a bit of stuff. And believe it or not, my work can just kind of become a bit of a cocoon because there's always so much to do. Um, so, when we're practicing because we feel we need to show up, so for example, in relationship to the shootings in Atlanta, all of the kind of violence and hate crime towards people in of Asian descent, show up. If we feel unbalanced, then just again, we're not a kite that string has been cut. We do have a bit of agency, right? So how can we just kind of reel ourselves in when we need to be reeled in? How can we demonstrate some of that agency? So yeah, the world is on fire, right? And the one weird news thing I was reading yesterday was about these endocrine disrupting chemicals, these forever chemicals, and it's suggested that there may be no human sperm count by something like 2054 at the rate we're going, which means there'll be no ability to reproduce. So it's like if it's not the environment, it's stuff like that, or it's war, or I don't know what's going to happen, um, and I don't think you can know, right? But we can know our mind, and that's not a cop out. It's not a cop out at all. I can't. By practicing, we're showing up in a different way. And if we practice differently, we're showing up in a more powerful way. Hopefully that makes sense. Well, I don't know. I don't know if big genitals are the answer. Um, so let's move on to the text. So last week we ended up focusing on pointing out the still mind, and this week um, we're going to move on um, to pointing out the moving mind. So, of course, by all means, ask any questions as they come up. Let's see, it's 2:45. Okay, so allow yourself to bring yourself into a place of practice. Allow yourself to settle, bring awareness to breath, awareness to the continuum of mind, awareness to experience, awareness to all of your senses, and to thought activity. And so, Ninth Karmapa points out that by using this next way of looking, right, pointing out the moving mind, if all movement of thought is empty, free from arising and ceasing, that is merely jargon, right? Jargon of emptiness. So the way that we're like, oh, everything is empty. That's kind of jargony. It's too philosophic. It's too reductionist, right? It's not necessarily rooted in our experience. He says, though, that if thoughts can appear and disappear without leaving a trace, this is the beginning of having a little bit of experience, right? So allowing ourselves to watch our thoughts, be present with them, and to see as they arise, come into being, and as they disappear, do they leave any trace? Do they leave a mark? Or some ooze, some slime, or not? Is it like there's a little hole where the thought comes up, like whack-a-mole? Whack a thought? Or do they just arise and kind of disappear? He goes on to say that if the arising of a thought and its liberation occur at the same time, without it being identified as something, free from clinging to its clarity and free from grasping, and without any fixation on thinking that it is not identified as something, the pointing out has been recognized. So I'm going to repeat this. If the arising of a thought and its liberation occur at the same time without it being identified as something, free from clinging to its clarity and free from grasping, and without any fixation on thinking that it is not identified as something, the pointing out has been recognized. So what does it mean for a thought to be liberated in its place? Thought arises. There's just a knowingness in relationship to it. Silent observation. There's no kind of like, this or that, good or bad. There's no analysis, no room for analysis. It just arises, is experienced, and dissolves without a trace, without us making a big deal, without us saying, this is what it was, without any fixation on thinking that it is not identified as something. Oh, that was a thought. But when we say things like that, oh, that was a thought, that's like like birthing something. And so you're just letting it happen. No big deal. Furthermore, thought and the object that is realized. Mind, when it is still and when it moves, and previous thoughts and so forth are neither good nor bad. Right? So today, if we've ever had any thoughts like, oh man, like that thought is messed up, I shouldn't think that, ooh. So there's that. Or there's thinking that thing that's all messed up, but no reaction. It's just happening, right? Or about an object. Oh, that book, man. There it is. I wouldn't mind canceling the rest of my day and just laying in bed with it. Without any such distinctions, they are nakedly realized as luminous insight. And of course, the words get a little grandiose. Luminous insight. All we're doing is letting things happen. Letting go of reactivity, letting go of speculation, letting go of emptiness, and trading that out with experience, and burning your books, killing the Buddha, destroying the Gompa, sacking the library, getting out of our head, right? Getting into direct experience. This is the only way that we end up learning. Otherwise, we could just buy a bunch of books, and we get to put on a robe and say that we're so-and-so. Right? But that's not what it's about. So he continues, it's not that thoughts become luminous and empty after they have been drawn in or after they've faded. When thoughts are realized to be luminous and empty immediately upon their arising, the pointing out has been recognized. Now all three, the movement of thought, the stillness, and the nature of thoughts themselves, are naked as luminosity emptiness. I'm going to repeat that. Now all three, the movement of thoughts, the stillness, and the nature of thoughts, are naked as luminosity emptiness. Thoughts, stillness, and the nature of thoughts. The mind that's active, the mind that's still, and the nature of mind. How are they different? Where is that difference? There's not the slightest difference between thought and non-thought, other than the labeling of the mind that does not recognize them. And so there's not the slightest difference between thought and non-thought, other than the labeling of the mind that does not recognize them. Good, bad, big, small, complex, simple, preferred, not preferred. just experiencing directly. Karmapa continues, previously, as you did not recognize thoughts, they were not meditation. Oh man, that's too bad. You didn't recognize them. It's not meditation. They were ignorance. Because we were like running around chasing after, oh my God, this, oh my God, that. Like, oh my God, this other stuff. Chasing, like being stuck in a kaleidoscope that's constantly turning. And we're just chasing after this, chasing after that, chasing after this other thing. Never taking the time to begin to just understand, and even taking the time to rest into the directness of what's happening. Oh, this kaleidoscope is turning. I'm experiencing that. A hall of mirrors, a freak show. And that's what it can feel like. We're stuck in a freak show. Except the freak show is our own reactivity. And Karmapa goes on to say, now if you do recognize thought, thought itself is meditation and wisdom. Now make thought the basis of meditation. Right? So just as much as, I don't know, for anyone, in the audience who's had kids, like there's this point, with like babies, right? Like, they can't verbalize hunger, right? So they cry, right? Or discomfort or being wet or whatever, right? So it's like that crying indicates that, generally something needs to gas, that something needs to be addressed, right? But then like there comes a time, and with my first son, like we're able to teach him a little bit of sign language, right? So he would be able to indicate hunger, like when he was hungry, and it was like a godsend. There was no interpretation necessary. I mean, it's always a little bit, but it was like, oh, clear, he's hungry. Like, let's, get him, the food he needs, or, whatever it is that he needs, and then things will settle back down, right? He won't be upset. Our mind is like that considerably. When we know, oh, like, right now things are quite agitated, right? My mind is moving fast, super reactive. We can know, okay, now is the time to settle. Right? So we can rest into Mahamudra and just experience that, right? And if that's okay, then, then to go ahead and do that. But if that's intense, then it makes sense to just slow ourselves down a little bit. Right? It's very difficult at times to practice within that place of intense reactivity. Being in a traumatic situation, for example, right? Things just move so fast. They move in such an intense way. It's not even really movement. It's just like flashes of thought, flashes of experience. When you can recognize them, then at the very least you can take a moment and care for yourself. Get involved in some self-care. But over time, if we can slowly bring that to our practice, then we're able to experience directly what's happening. And perhaps that reactivity doesn't become something that we need to change. Maybe it's something that we can just experience and let happen. And again, we live in a world system where everything is codified in terms of value, right? If it's not economic value, it's some other kind of value, right? And there's something very innately human about assessing everything, for value, and we do that with our thoughts and our emotions, and so how do we break that pattern? And so the practice of meditation is this practice of breaking this pattern. So when Karmapa says, make thought the basis of meditation, it challenges any of us who may have been kind of preoccupied with, well, when I meditate, I need to experience nothing. That doesn't sound too fun to me. Nothing. And just let it happen. If it's a hard week, let it be a hard week. Let hard week come. Let hard week happen. Hard week will not last forever. Period of mourning. Let period of mourning happen. Experience period of mourning. There seems to me, in my experience, that fear is a huge kind of indicator of the presence of fear around the degree to which we can just let things happen. You know, especially with respect to just happening within our mind. Not wanting to feel fear. Not wanting to feel loss. Being afraid of what it means to be tired. Being afraid of what it means to be less than. And rather than, getting involved in kind of all of the just energy loss created by judging, by assessing, by being tossed this way and that by our fear, what if we just learn to relax into everything? And this is where Tulpa Six Nails, so beautiful. Relax. Rest in this moment and relax. So then Karmapa goes on to say, previously thoughts obscured themselves and you could not see their nature, right? Pure, or wrapped up with other things. Now meditation on thoughts is superior to meditation on non-thought. Right? There's so much of it. Beautiful thing about samsara is there's a lot to practice with, right? It's like, the best place to perform alchemy is a place where you're surrounded by lead. You can just be like, look at all of this dross material that I will, transmute into the philosopher's stone. You should recognize whatever thoughts arise. If thoughts do not arise, rest within their not arising. No big deal. It is not necessary to produce them. Even if they do arise, rest within their arising. It is not necessary to dissolve them. So what he's saying is, let it come and let it go. Don't control. It's not as if it's less than to have thought activity, and it's more than to have non-thought, no thought activity. It's not the case that emotional reactivity is less than stability of mind, where it's just, just let it happen. Don't get so wrapped up in all of the need for my practice to be a particular way. Not creating any notions of hope and fear, make thoughts themselves the essence of meditation. Hope and fear. Oh, I hope. I hope everyone knows how great my meditation is. Oh, I hope no one sees how shitty my meditation is. Oh, I'm glad nobody can read my mind. Oh, I wish everybody could see how pure my mind is. They'd be jealous. Oh, these thoughts are nothing more than mind. No big deal. You know, that mind is in essence self-liberated, naked, luminous, and empty, the Dharmakaya, free from what it is to be liberated and what liberates. Again, this, our mind, is in essence self-liberated. Naked, luminous, and empty, the Dharmakaya, free from what is to be liberated and what liberates. Realizing that it's the dawning of vipassana from thought. Realizing this is Dharma born of insight in relationship to thought. The pointing out of the union of luminosity and emptiness as the Dharmakaya has been recognized. In brief, recognize whatever arises and rest in that itself without altering anything or wandering. To letting everything happen without altering it, without changing it, without feeling like, oh man, I suck. I suck at this. I'm a bad meditator. Claim your seat. And I think the thing that's very hard about this kind of practice for people is that people don't want the immediacy of this practice to be as real as it is. To be able to just, it's all here, right? There's nothing that much else one needs to do. You don't have to go to India. You don't have to, buy some kind of Dharma clothes. You don't need a name, you don't need ritual implements. You don't need a consort. And I'm sure there are people who will be very upset about that, but you don't. You don't need to get all crazy and tantric. You just need to rest into the experience of mind. It's free. It's not like there's no dearth of thought activity, if we're going to be totally honest. Right? No dearth of emotional reactivity. This is all you need. This is all we have. This relationship between experience of sound, sight, taste, touch, feeling. This is all we have. This direct experience of phenomena is all we have. There's nothing else. So how to combine this practice of let it all happen with injustice in the world? Should we let all things happen internally as a basis for external power to change? My question is similar to the issue of all is emptiness, which seems an easy way out of the reality of other beings suffering. Well, I think there are a couple interesting points about this question. The first is that it's a very common question when we begin to explore the fundamental purity of mind. Right? Let it all happen and rest into the fundamental purity of mind. And then very commonly, one hears questions like, well, how can I do that when everybody is suffering? How can I do that when there is injustice in the world? Right. So the first thing is um, looking at why that question comes up at that time. Like that's what's kind of increasingly fascinating for me, because part of it is that there is, again, seems to be a sense of discomfort that this is it. This world, this experience is it. And I don't know if this is why so many people like Shambhala, or liked Shambhala or whatever, like this belief in an enlightened society. And I'm not saying it's not worth attempting that, but sometimes all that we can control and take responsibility for at first is our own reactivity. What does it mean to have a mind where we don't project? And I mean that truly. I don't mean project just in terms of race, project in terms of gender, project in terms of desire, project in terms of preference, project in terms of power dynamics, power differential. So that's hard. Right? So let it all happen is one thing, right? But to truly, without hubris, begin to open up to the experience of a mind that is free of preference and projection, a mind that's free of anxiety and agitation, not because anxiety and agitation doesn't arise, but because we're able to understand and experience and rest into the direct way in which mind unfolds, the way thought activity unfolds, the way thought activity occurs. And so, there's also then this deep reflection that sometimes needs to happen with respect to the various types of refuge to take, right? The reliable and unreliable forms of refuge. And, politics is unreliable. And I'm not saying don't, try and enact change. It's vital to try and enact change, right? But there's an aspect of humanity that appears to not change. This need for power, the ability of power to corrupt, this cycle that just keeps on happening and happening. So there's a big difference between experiencing, and actually I think this is the other part, is that what is the difference between being able to experience mind as fundamentally liberated, the ground of complete freedom, and the reduction of everything to just one characteristic? So is it possible to rest into the fundamental nature of mind and want to act for the welfare of all beings through, fighting for change in the government? Of course. I mean, look at the Dalai Lama, right? But what I'm really curious about is the why. It almost comes up as a pushback, and I'm not saying Jan, that you're pushing back, but there is an aspect of ourselves that pushes back against the fundamental purity of mind. Well, if mind is so pure, why is the world fucked up? We're talking about two different things. We're talking about samsara and nirvana. And when we use, this almost like conditional way of referencing one to the other. Well, if everything's so great, why am I suffering? Well, why are you suffering? That's what this practice is about. Understanding how we're suffering, experiencing the root of that suffering, getting to know that, being with it, and then allowing it to transform. But until we've done it, it's all theoretical. It might as well just be like as exciting as reading a phone book. Some philosophical text. That's basically a little useless. Like, it can be helpful, right? Yeah, but sitting and resting with the nature of our projections, sitting and resting with our preferences, sitting and resting with the mind as it's active, the mind as thought activity that we do not like is arising, and resting into that directly. So doing that, right, being involved in that, is not an abdication of power that could be used for benefiting other beings. In fact, it's a way of training into the development of qualities that are needed to be able to rest into greater power, to be able to bring change. Because, another similar question is, well, if the mind is fundamentally free, well, then why do people hurt one another? And I think these questions, they're to some extent, they're a little unanswerable. And the second is that the posing of the question, that particular question, seems at times to be rooted in a reactivity. A lack of trust, maybe you could say. A lack of trust that this could be pure. We needed to test it. So Anjana writes, I feel like this teaching is about doing one's own work on reactivity is also particularly relevant as we examine the harms we're constantly enacting, as well as witnessing/experiencing. Yeah. Let's take something like, experiencing a critique. It's as somebody offers criticism, either wanted or unwanted, and we experience it, right? And then if it feels unjustified, right, we often bristle at it, and there can be almost like a physiological reaction to it. Feel it in our body. And then that can cause these waves of like, oh boy, that person they really don't get it. They're missing the point. They don't understand, da 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 da. Right? And that builds up into something else, and that builds up into something else, right? And so if somebody could offer the critique and we're able to just let the sound come, acknowledge the sound, let the sound go, no, residual impact. And then the next sound happens, and the next one. So when we look at people's reactivity in the world, like that person who shot those 8 people in Atlanta, chances are his mind was not experienced as fundamentally pure. And it's not to denigrate him, right? But generally, when we do anything very destructive, it is because we are wrapped up. We are, things have been justified and justified and justified and justified by our thought activity. Even, when we're not harming people physically, but in an argument, we get caught in our own feedback loop. right? To the point sometimes where we're completely irrational. If we're able to recognize the nature of thought and the relationship between mind that experiences movement of thought, mind that's still, and the nature of both, our reactivity doesn't arise in that same way. And this allows us to not get so triggered. And this allows us to not get so hot and bothered about things. And then this decreases the likelihood that we're going to lash out, if we're talking about some kind of like aggressive thing. So I'm going to ask you, Brett, so what, this is about the two truths, ultimate and relative. And that's a binary. And so we can be caught and paralyzed between these two truths, like, oh my God, ultimate and relative, ultimate and relative, ultimate and relative. At some point, we need to get off that seesaw and practice and go deep and experience. And it's not about giving one up for the other, but it's about learning to let go of the teeter-tottering kind of relationship to both. Because, again, like, the existence of ultimate and relative truth is not to confound. Like, that's not its role. Its role is not to promote confusion. The ability to experience both ultimate and relative is available to us. But we need to let go of fear and anxiety if we want to do that. Disturbing thoughts don't negate purity. Exactly. So have disturbing thoughts. Disturbing images. How do you respond to disturbing images? Imagine sitting in front of a television or a screen of some kind of disturbing images, and rest into the practice of Mahamudra. So Anjana writes, can you say a little more about lack of trust in the way we articulate these? Well, then how come? Questions. Something feels very important there. I'm not saying anybody's doing this, but it is a very curious thing, how we will throw up very tricky questions to ourselves, right? Or to the practice, as a way of not letting ourselves let go into further spaciousness. Trusting into the fact that there is further spaciousness. And perhaps trusting into the fact that which we have allowed ourselves to be positioned in relationship to might actually not be the way we assume it to be. So even this idea, so we, as our practice gets more and more quote unquote refined, or more and more quote subtle, or more and more quote quote deep, then even ideas like good and bad begin to dissolve. And then there's a part of us that will experience fear, anxiety, discomfort with that languaging. Oh, well, that doesn't feel very safe to me. That's not about safety. You know, and therein is a very kind of tricky place for us to kind of relate to. It's not because we're going to go lash out and destroy things or people. That's because we are habituated to seeing things in that binary way: relative, absolute, good, bad, inner, outer, past, present, or past, future. Maybe it's not all that simple. I mean, maybe that's too simple. Maybe it's a lot more complex. Maybe it's a lot more free. If I'm asking a why question about my practice or other people or things, that's a red flag for me that there's a lack of spaciousness and curiosity around what's alive at the moment. Yeah, I mean, so again, this isn't. First of all, I would be 100% transparent. There's no problem asking questions. This is not a cult. Um, but more, it's looking at like when our questions become a wall to going any further. Kind of like that those moments when you're sitting in practice and everything is kind of settling really beautifully, and then we start coming up with reasons to stop our meditation. Oh well, it sounds like maybe I don't know. There's some reason I need to get up. Maybe I think I need a cup of tea real quick. You get up. Oh my God, that sound is really making me. I think I need to go check. Did I leave the iron on? All of these things, right? So often, as things begin to settle, there's a part of us that doesn't. It pushes back against things, kind of coming down into an experience of um, of unity. And Melissa, I agree with you. Awareness of mind in oneself can affect community, and also that awareness of mind doesn't negate peaceful activism. I mean, to be honest, it doesn't negate non-peaceful activism. And again, this is that conundrum presented by Lama Shang, who was a contemporary of First Karmapa, who was a meditation master, a Mahamudra master in particular, who was also a warlord. And so could it be that this does not have so much to do with conventional ethics? And I know that that's very uncomfortable for people because there's this predilection, this need to, kind of equate great meditative stabilization with good all the time. Yeah. So, opening out or closing in, that's also binary. The practice of just letting everything be. I saw a very strange thing yesterday. I don't know how it relates to this, but I'm just going to. Yesterday, I saw an animal, a wild animal, collapse and die, right? And it was just so odd. It was really, really strange. It was a deer, and it was with two other deer, so there were three deer, and they saw me. Two ran away, and then it fell to its knees, and then it tried to pull itself up, and then it collapsed. And then by the time I got to it, its eyelids were just kind of like, twitching a little bit, and then it had died. Right? And so, the thing that was very amazingly kind of like, like disturbing about it was just how, like, random. I've seen a lot of death, and I've seen people die, but I haven't seen anything die just like that, and there is something in this where can we allow these things to happen without making it into such a big deal? The death of that animal, is it fortunate or unfortunate? I'm not sure. It's not my, I don't think my judging it will go anywhere. But being open to this, kind of very strange experience and letting it happen, and not running around, not getting activated, just letting it be. Letting myself be, letting the death be, letting the finality of that be, and then letting the next thing come. I'll just close by suggesting that it is worth considering the degree to which our conditioning, especially around some of these like Western cultural things, around constantly doing. If you're not doing the good work, right? Is that is a point of view, and that may not be ultimate truth. But for us as practitioners of Mahamudra, the most important thing is learning this for ourselves. Right? And we can only learn this ourselves through engaging in the practice. Right? So we might find that, yes, I need to be deeply in this world to fight injustice, and I'm going to be active in it and practice Mahamudra. That's great. That's wonderful. And there might be somebody who says, I'm going to, purify my mind so that I can be able to be present for beings in a way that's non-judging, open, free. That's fine too. There's no. I don't think that there's any question about the form. But at some point, it behooves us to just let the whole bottom fall out. And the bottom falling out really has a lot to do with us letting preference for anything dissolve and resting into that experience and remaining aware in that moment. So with that, I want to thank everyone for coming and being here. In this moment, I'd like to dedicate any merit from these ramblings of mine to the deer that died yesterday and its community of other deer that I'm sure are feeling its loss. Dedicate the merit to everybody who's died today, their family members who are suffering, feeling great loss. Dedicate the merit to everybody who's sick. Dedicating the merit to everybody whose endocrine system is being disrupted by chemicals. Dedicating the merit to everybody who is a victim of injustice and violence. Dedicating the merit to other planets. Dedicating the merit to flowers and bees. Dedicating the merit to mosquitoes and leeches. Dedicating the merit to egg-born creatures born from eggs. Dedicating the merit to flies. Dedicating the merit to dogs. Dedicating the merit to ghosts. Dedicating the merit to all practitioners of Mahamudra. So thank you all. Take good care. Be well and be healthy.